How to deploy a J2EE war to Tomcat using Digital.ai deploy. So in this demo, we're going to talk about how to deploy a war file to a Tomcat server using Digital.ai deploy. So what are you going to need for this? Well, you need a workstation with internet access, a server running Tomcat and SSH access to it. I'm going to be using Docker Compose to set up my my deploy instance, and my Tomcat server is going to be running in AWS. Now, you can set up those two in different ways if you like, and I'll run through the actual configuration in the deploy server so you'll be able to recreate something that's slightly different on your own. Now, I have included with this demo a series of YAML files that allow you to recreate the infrastructure that I'm going to show you today. So you'll be able, so if you set up an instance in AWS and run Tomcat, you'll actually be able to work this same demo that I'm showing you here today. So the thing comes in a couple parts. So the first part is I actually have a start demo script, which will actually start the demo up. And so what that's going to do is it's going to start a instance of Digital.ai deploy in a Docker container using Docker Compose. So let's go ahead and start that. Okay, so I'm here. I go start demo. And so that'll start the demo, get the demo started up. So then let's go back to our code here. So once the demo is up and running, we're going to want to do the build.sh to do that. But while we're waiting for that demo to come up, let's look and see what it's going to happen. So what the demo does is and not only does it start the container, but it also creates some infrastructure for us and so forth. We'll look at later. And so that it's going to create an environment for us, and it'll create the infrastructure. And then because we're running this in EC2, the authentication into these Linux boxes is with an SSH key. So I have my key here, and I'm actually going to deploy it into my Docker server, running deploy, so that I can actually SSH into the targets that I want to connect to. So let's go back and see how our deploy is done. So it looks like it's created everything okay. And so the thing is everything is up and running. So then let's take a look at what infrastructure was created in deploy for this. So we'll go over here. Now I'm doing this out of this GitHub repo. So we have a public repo here with this Motley Bank thing, and all this stuff is actually in this repo. So you'll be able to use it yourself. But if I look here in deploy, we'll notice that if I open this up, I have some folders. I have this Tomcat server. And if we look at that, that is simply an SSH over their host. And so what deploy is going to do is it's going to use this information to SSH over to that box. And we're going to do sudo. So everything I'm going to do as root, because the EC2 user is allowed to do that. There's a number of other ways that we can configure this, but for this demo, this is what I'm going to do here. Then that actually contains a Tomcat server. And so we give that Tomcat server, like, what's the path to where we installed Tomcat? I could have multiple Tomcat servers on this SSH host, and I could put them in different directories. And then I have the startup commands and so forth. So I'm using systemctl to start and stop the Tomcat server, and also to get the status of it. And then finally, what we want to do is we want to deploy our application into a virtual host. And so our web apps folder is where we're going to install all of our applications under the Tomcat root. And in that, there's going to be a virtual host, and that virtual host is going to be where this guy is located. There's also a configuration context that you can use if you wish to add things like the JDBC stuff for the container and stuff like that. So that's how we're setting up the infrastructure. So that's where we're going to be deploying stuff. Now, in order to deploy it, I'm going to need to define an environment. So I actually have an environment here we defined. And in that environment, we have defined our Tomcat server and the local host, which is the virtual host that we're going to be deploying this application to. Now, currently, I don't have my M&T Bank installed here. So let's go back over to our code, and we'll look at that. So I want to actually create our M&T Bank application using YAML. So this is how you would actually do the CI. When we put things into applications into deploy, then what happens is they're in the repository, and we can like export those things as DAR files, and we can import those as DAR files. But that's not tremendously practical for CI. What's actually a lot more convenient is to use this YAML file format. And of course, I can put variables in here. So I have this version I'm going to pass in when we build it. So if I was building this with like a Jenkins or a Bamboo or something like that, I could actually pass in a version variable every time I build this, so everything would have a unique version. I might make the same file here, this M&T Bank war file, or I might make a different file, but every time I do it, I'll actually update that version, so I'll have a new version. So let's go and actually create this application. So we'll run the build.sh script to do that. It goes through and it builds that war file and then applies those YAMLs to actually put that into our deploy instance. So now if I go back to deploy, we will see that I actually have a web app here, Motley Bank. And it's just, if we look at this, it's just a war file, like we said. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy this thing. So I click on the deploy, and we can drag our Motley our web app to our deployment canvas. Oops, wrong one, this one. And I can find an environment that I want to deploy to and drag that to our deployment canvas. And then it'll actually figure out what steps we would want to do. So in here, we're going to stop the Tomcat server, wait for it to shut down, create the Motley M&T Bank XML file on the local host, and then we're going to copy our war file over and start Tomcat back up again. So these all seem like reasonable steps. Of course, if I double click on one of these things, I can see that, I can see what that context is going to be. I can see some details about what's going to have no preview available for this one. But then when I click on deploy, it'll go through and execute these steps. And so I can actually watch it go through and execute that. It keeps a log of all these steps that are executed. So you have audit trail of when these things are happening and who did it and all that sort of stuff. So we go through here, we're actually starting Tomcat up. We're waiting for it to finish starting. And as soon as Tomcat comes back up, we could actually go over to EC2 and check the status of that page. So so it's done. Let's go over here and we'll reload this page. And sure enough, our website is up and running. Now, one of the other things I can do with this is I can, just as easily as I deployed something, I can undeploy it. And this is actually handy if I want to do upgrades, or if after I've done some upgrades, I want to clean things up and get rid of the stuff. So this will actually go through similar sort of process, except for now, instead of copying new things over to the server, it actually deploys things. Also interesting here is if I was doing an upgrade, deploy would be able to figure out which things haven't changed and only copy over the things that have been modified. So after we wait a few seconds here for this server to come back up, and it has, we can go back over to our website here and reload this page. And sure enough, there's nothing here because we undeployed it. So that is how you can deploy an application to Tomcat, as well as undeploy the application. So thank you, and I hope that you found this useful.